Steve's journey began far from Wall Street, growing up in a family that valued hard work, discipline, and education, values that would shape his approach to leadership throughout his life. After earning his undergraduate degree at Yale and then his MBA at Harvard Business School, Steve quickly distinguished himself, as I remember well, as one of Lehman Brothers' youngest partners leading their mergers and acquisitions business. And then in 1985, he co-founded Blackstone with Pete Peterson, and he and I met that year when he was raising Blackstone's first fund, and we'll come back to that. So what began at the time actually as a small advisory firm has grown into the world's leading investment firm with a market cap, and I'm always stunned when I think about it, Steve, of $150 billion and AUM of close to $1.3 trillion, numbers which we would have never imagined sitting there at that time. But importantly, beyond business, Steve has made a real impact on philanthropy as a central part of his legacy. He founded the Schwarzman Scholars program to bring together future global leaders, and is expanding the Stephen A. Schwarzman Foundation to focus on education, culture, medical innovation, and AI, which we'll come back to. But Steve is really widely respected, not only as an advisor to global leaders, which he performs an important role on, but also as a mentor who has developed a world-class generation of professionals in Blackstone and outside of Blackstone. Thank you for being with us today, Steve. It's an honor and a pleasure. And as you know, after the session, we'll do our usual comments and questions on Slido, which obviously I don't know how to work. Steve, let's start at the very beginning. As a teenager, you first mentioned mowing lawns and recruiting your brothers in Philadelphia. What did that first business venture teach you about entrepreneurship, trust, initiative, managing? What did you get out of those beginnings?
Well, I learned that it was good to have income.
As you and I have discussed, yep.
It was good to have someone else doing the work. I was the sales department, so I brought in the business. And I also learned that if you underpay the people who do the work, you end up with a revolution. And so that was a wise lesson for life.
But Steve, growing up in Philadelphia, sort of what values from your childhood most shaped you in terms of leadership, decision-making, philanthropy? Because your beginnings were very important to you. What were the values you
Well, it's like everyone, you know, you grow up in a family and you see what your family's values are. And my dad worked really 6 days a week at his store. And then on the seventh day, he did orders, you know, sort of at the dining room table. So that's what I internalized as normal. You know, I also, growing up, you know, got a chance to do athletics, you know, in school. Very competitive level, and I absolutely loved that. You know, I loved the training. Sometimes I didn't love the training so much, but you know, the actual competition. I was on a track team. We never lost. It was you know, from 8th grade to finishing high school, we won every dual meet. We won a lot of championships. We were third in the United States in sprints, so that was really wonderful. Plus, you know, I got to be president of my school, that was interesting. First, how do you get there? You know, which is a sales function,
right?
And then I wanted to do unique things in that job. And so I thought about what could you do? And then I ended up communicating with my little management team, my vice president and so forth, of the student council, and we ended up bringing a big rock and roll group who was, you know, the top 10 chart to the school, and things that they'd never done. So that part of my life was I guess, a little bit of a warm-up for my grown-up
It certainly
type of life.
was. But also was a very, very, if I may say, it was a traditional family upbringing. And then you went from this lovely, if I could say, middle-class upbringing in Philadelphia, and you showed up at Yale. What impact did that have when you show up at this fancy Ivy League school coming out of Philadelphia in terms of your ambitions, your development? How did you fit in? What did you think?
Well, what I should say first, to complete the background.
Sure.
Until I was 13, I grew up in an area that wasn't very good, economically, and one of the kids I played with's father was basically assassinated by the mob, and I remember going over to his house afterwards, and he had a toolbox filled with $100 bills. Now, this is in the 1950s.
Right.
A $100 bill, who had ever seen one, let alone a kid having stuff like that? So it wasn't, it was a tough part of life. And so I was very privileged to be able to have that part of life, and then the nice suburban middle-class part of life. Now, as to Yale, that was a complete shock.
Right.
I got a 68 on my first English paper on Bartleby the Scrivener, and by Herman Melville. And then I got a 66 on my second paper, and I said, oh my God, I'm going to fail out. I'm doing my best.
Right.
And this is like a catastrophe. And the English professor called me for a meeting, which was not surprising. And I sat down, and he said, Mr. Schwarzman, I'm here to talk to you about your English paper. And I said, well, there's no reason to really do that. And he said, why might that be? I said, because I had nothing to say, and I said it poorly. And he said, by God, you're not stupid. You just can't think and you can't write. He said, I'll teach you to write first, because you can't write and learn how to think at the same time. And then once you figure out how to write, I'll give you the answers for other essays, and then you'll learn how to think. And by the end of my first year, instead of failing out, which I was in real danger of doing, right. I thought, I ended up on Dean's List, which was sort of the top level. So they rescued me. And then culturally, it was life-changing, because I had never imagined or ever seen what it was like to be part of, you would call it sort of the establishment, right. Which existed in the 1960s, mostly gone now. But in my dormitory, I had a kid named George W. Bush. He was a year ahead of me, and I remember we had a parents' weekend once a year, and I remember waiting for my parents, and George's father had gotten to the lunch earlier. He was just standing around. I didn't know he was George's father. And, I introduced myself. We ended up talking for 15 minutes. Now, who would imagine both of these guys would be president of the United States, right?
Right.
And so my world dramatically changed and expanded. My horizons expanded, because you'd meet all these extraordinary people, not just the classmates, but the older people, I mean, the master of my college was the grandson of another president, Horace Taft, and his wife, and she gave me books on ballet because I was interested in that, and I ended up starting a whole ballet thing. Well, this never, when I ended up as a grown-up, chairman of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and this never would have happened.
So Yale opened your eyes completely. From that standpoint. And frankly, a lot of the kids around you were people you probably had never run into in Philadelphia. So it was a very, very different kind, and in some ways kind of set the basis, and we'll come back to that, because after Yale, you went to HBS, to Harvard Business School. And Steve, I always feel that amongst many things, you're an entrepreneur at heart. What did you get out of Harvard Business School? Or was it just something you had to do after Yale for the next progression?
No, I got a job at a firm called Donaldson, Lufkin and Jennerette right after I graduated, waiting to go into the military, and I got put in a situation that was completely hopeless. I was a social science major, psychology, anthropology, biology, and one of the other social sciences. And I had no idea about economics. I never took an economics course. I still haven't. And they gave me a desk, a secretary, and asked me to start doing financial assignments. And somebody gave me something called an annual report. And I opened this thing up. I said, why do they have all these numbers at the back? And then all these little, sort of small letters, and
the footnotes.
Yeah, they had a thing that said footnotes. Footnotes to what? I somehow managed to survive by avoiding assignments for like 8 months. And it was the most frightening time in my life because I was completely unprepared. And these were grown-ups. I mean, they had a real business. And ultimately sold to Credit Suisse. I think it was $10 or $12 billion deal. And I basically said, I gotta learn some of this foundational stuff, or I can't put myself in this thing and I'm gonna wash out and fail. And that's why I went to Harvard Business School, because I had a huge deficiency.
So you had two fear of failures, one at Yale starting out in English, a second, close encounter of the third kind at DLJ, and each time you repaired it by moving yourself forward and by learning and by HBS. But then in 1972, Steve, you joined one of the most storied old line companies, Lehman Brothers.
Well, let me just talk about Harvard Business School for a second, because you asked me.
Yeah.
That was really fascinating. It's the first time in my life that I was a really smart kid. And I mean, I always was in the top, like 5%, but they were always 4.9% ahead of you. At Harvard Business School, they really didn't have those smart kids there anymore. I don't think I got any smarter.
Right.
But all of a sudden, I knew the answers to all this stuff, and most of the other people didn't. Some of them couldn't even write sentences. I know that sounds strange. They came from all over the place. It was during the Vietnam War, and business was really bad, badly perceived, and all the smart people went to law school. They went to medical school. Nobody went to business school, and that's changed completely now. But I became like a real piece of work at the business school, and they had, every section. I think there were 12 different sections of 77 kids. The faculty picked their 3 best kids, so I was one of those for an organization, and then I became the president of that organization. So my Harvard Business School experience was really
was foundational from your standpoint.
And I was going to drop out after December because they were only teaching one basic principle, which is that everything in a business relates to everything else. And you have to have it all lined up. You have to have your personnel stuff right. You have to have your suppliers stuff right. And you have to have your sales stuff work. And it all has to be brought together in a seamless thing. Okay, I got that after 3 weeks. And I looked forward and I said, my God, I've got almost 2 years left to have different versions of the same thing. And I was going to drop out, and I wrote a note to Dick Generette, who's passed away, and I said, Dick, this was by December, I'm going to drop out. I want to come back to work. I want to go somewhere else to work, whatever. And he wrote me this lovely 6-page letter, handwritten letter. Dear Steve, in December of my first year at Harvard Business School, I wanted to drop out. I thought the kids weren't very smart. It wasn't challenging. And I wanted to switch to get a PhD in economics. I recommend in the strongest way that you do not drop out. You finish up. We can hire you later. You're always welcome here, or you'll do something else. And being a sort of a confused kid, I basically said, well, if that's what Dick says, I'm going to stay. Absolutely the right decision, and I owe it all to him. So one of the things about leadership, mentorship, whatever, you're not aware of the impact you can make on other people. So I owe the course of what I'm doing to Dick.
Well, I mean, that's, from your standpoint, these people along the way, and obviously you've done it on a broader basis, had big impacts from you, whether it's going back to Yale, whether it's in Philadelphia. But as I was mentioning, you then went and joined the old line, almost the opposite of DLJ, if I may say it, Lehman Brothers, down on, I think it was 55 Wall, if I remember. Or
1 William Street.
1 William, exactly. One of the most establishment places out there. What kind of challenges did you face going from HBS, Dick Generette, which was very entrepreneurial, the old DLJ, to a pretty stodgy old line investment bank? What did you see there, Steve?
Well, my first day at work, the Lehman building was sort of like a triangle type building at 1 William Street. It's still there. And all made out of stone. And I walked to the elevator and pressed the little thing. They had steel doors, the doors open. And a guy walked out. I was in my new suit. My wife had brought me a new briefcase. In the olden days, you used to have a briefcase, keep your work in. The door opens and the guy walks out. He looks at me and he said, you must be one of the new people. I said, yes, it's my first day at work. He said, you'll love it here at Lehman Brothers. And I'm thinking, well, that's why I chose it. And he said, at Lehman Brothers, you never have to be worried about being stabbed in the back, because here we just walk right up to you and stab you in the chest.
I've never heard that.
This is my first day at work. And, I sort of went, well, this is going to be an adventure. And it was.
But it ended up being, I mean, you became one of the youngest partners, if not the youngest partner at Lehman in the M&A business, and then this establishment entity ended up being sold in 1984 to American Express.
I sold it.
You were the one that sold it, as I remember well, but you left and decided to start a business from scratch. What led you to take that level of risk from your standpoint? Because you were leaving the establishment and going into the unknown.
Well, it was, one, I had a non-compete.
Right.
So I couldn't go anywhere.
I remember.
Second, the firm was sold because, there was a senior management failure. And there was some trading done that violated trading limits. And we sort of woke up one day and found out the firm didn't have a net worth. I was 10 years younger than the people who were on the board. It was all internal board, private company. The people 10 years older than me didn't try and get rid of the senior management that had perpetrated this disaster on the rest of us. So we were sort of floating towards a financial collapse. And I was asked, because I was heading the merger department at that point, I think I was 34, something like that, to sell the firm by the opening of business on Monday. So you talk about a high stress situation. I then knew what the financial situation of the firm was. I said, okay, I've only got so many shots on goal here, and I got to get to an announcement Monday morning. So, and it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I've got 4 days, 2 of which are weekends days. I approached my next door neighbor, who was president of Schwarzman Lehman American Express, or Schwarzman American Express, and talked to him, and he talked to the CEO of American Express, and we worked out a deal by announced on Monday. But through that process, I got to see how the people ahead of me had behaved and what had happened with this whole mess and the lack of appropriate governance. And I said, look, there were a lot of other ways to solve this problem. We could have brought in external capital. We could have stayed independent. But, it was like easier to sell the business so everybody can get rich. And these were all inheritors.
Right.
They did nothing but join the firm like me, and you inherited all these accounts. And then you cultivated those, you got some new business.
You certainly got into the action then, but you took on a real level of risk. I mean, Steve, when you and I met, I remember this actually quite clearly. My old boss, Bruce Wasserstein, threw me a piece of paper and said, I've got a very good friend of mine across the street, go see if you can help. And I knew nothing, as you know, zero. And I went over to your office, and I remember it clearly, and I met with you in the Seagram's building. And your partner at the time, Pete Peterson, barely looked up to say hello. He was writing a speech. And you and I sat down, and I don't know if you remember this, but you made a comment to me that in effect said, we're too late for the LBO business. It's already passed. There's KKR, Gibbons Green, Forsman Little, et cetera. We're late. What were the doubts that were going through your head? Because we were looking at, as you know, you were raising, it's hard to believe, Blackstone 1. What were the doubts in your head at the time?
Well, most entrepreneurs don't have a lot of doubts, because if you did, you'd be crazy to do this entrepreneurial stuff. So I thought we basically had a 3-part strategy. One was to go into the M&A business because we knew how to do it. it's one of the world's great businesses. You need no capital, and all you do is talk. And somebody gives you millions of dollars. This is wonderful. Like today, unfortunately, I'm not getting anything for this. But you go to a boardroom and you tell them what you think, and they give you millions of dollars if you're good at the advice business. And I knew this would be a good way for us to fund our growth.
Yep.
And since we were the most active merger department in the world at that time, Goldman had bigger size, but we had more deals, that I knew that was like a gimme. And second thing we said we're going to do was what's now called the private equity business, was then called the leveraged buyout business. So we're going to need to do a fund. And then the third thing we were going to do was start new money management businesses. We didn't know what they'd be, but to take advantages of the cyclical nature of the markets, the invention of new areas, and that we go in that. We called them at that point affiliates. We'd own 50%. The people we brought in would own 50%, and one of which became BlackRock.
Yep.
And was then called Blackstone Financial.
Yes.
We would control the business because I was worried about bad behavior, mostly if things weren't successful, because people in finance tend to do things that are in their own interest. I always was only interested in the customer's interest. And sometimes those could be in conflict, so I wanted the control to make sure we never hurt a customer in any way. And the person had to be sort of top people in the world, and the business had to have really big potential. So that was our strategic plan. And we announced that, and we sent out notes to everybody we knew. You had to do that then. There was no internet. You mailed these things. And I expected the phone to ring off the hook. And so I took all these envelopes, there were like 500 of them, to the post office and waited, and nothing happened.
I remember.
I mean, nothing happened. So I thought maybe the delivery was lost. So we started calling the 500 people, and it's a lot harder to get through when you're not at Citibank and you're at some no-name startup. So we finally got through to the first person, and he said he didn't have anything for us to work on, but he did get our note. So that in a way was more depressing. And so we worked our way through as many people who would take our call, and we got no business. And I kept thinking, what was going on here? And also, this sounds like certain death if you have no business and you call everybody you know. And I said, there's something I missed here. And what I missed is that there were no boutiques in the United States. And we set ourselves up with two guys who were very well known at that time, but nobody on the client side, no corporation would ever consider hiring two competent people, but insignificant compared to, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, First Boston, Lehman.
Right.
So we actually had launched ourselves on some kind of modified suicide mission, which I was not aware of, because I had been working with all these companies, Pete and myself, and they loved working with us. We had huge amount of business. When I was a partner at Lehman, I was the third highest paid partner after the chairman and the president. And I was like early 30s.
And then all these people lost your phone number.
Yeah, it was really depressing. So after going through all those people, I said to Pete, well, what do you think we ought to do next? He said, well, let's wait a month and call him again. Now, this is a great strategic plan, right? You know, you want to understand fear.
Yeah.
Fear is starting out with $400,000, $200 from each of us, and every day you open, it's like one of those hourglass things. More sand goes out, and I kept watching our 400,000 go down to, it was like 183,000 before we got our first person who said, I'll work with you. It was really frightening, so frightening, and isolated, no one to talk to. And you know, we had a big perception, so there was a big expectation that we would be successful. And in New York, I learned that people are not truly happy unless somebody they know well is failing. And apparently I had nominated myself for that position. You know, so these were really desperate times. And what happens at the beginning of a business like this is, well, all the good business goes to like Citicorp. And the only things we would get hired for were these marginal, like, am I actually going to work on this? You know, I worked on our first piece of business was $50,000 fee, and I had never paid a legal bill that low. And you know, I just poured myself into this little assignment because this is survival. And I must say, this entrepreneur thing can really be overrated. I mean, this is dangerous, scary stuff. But once you're launched, you got to make it happen.
But I remember when you got Blackstone 1 done, which was an important moment in your time. I remember all of it well. We're not going to get into it now. Our closing dinner at Tavern on the Green, if you remember that well. But you actually, and I think it's been one of the hallmarks of you, Steve, is when you hit a roadblock, you turn around and, you know, just adjust the direction of travel. You had some issues earlier on. One of your first deals ran into problems, if you and I remember right, and Edgecombe Steel, which we remember. And then in the 1987 market crash, you lost some money in risk arbitrage. So with your affiliate at the time, you'd gone through all these different setbacks. What happened with those setbacks? How did they drive you in terms of, as you looked forward to evaluate risk and pivot? And we're going to come back to the rest of your pivots.
Yeah. Well, I was untrained in terms of being an investor. You know, I was an advisor. You know, and so you know, I made a mistake on our third investment because I really didn't understand how to do investments. And, you know, we had somebody walked in with one of our new partners, so I barely knew them, you know, came in with a deal and said it was a great deal. And we had no investment committee process. It was just sort of lined up at my desk. I thought that was what people did. I then realized it isn't. But what happened is one of the other partners heard about the deal. And he came in and said, this is like an awful deal. It's going to go busted, you know, within 6 months.
Yep.
And I said, why? So what did I do? I called the two of them in and asked them to plead their case. And I picked the wrong one. And we did the deal, and the deal couldn't make its first interest rate payment because steel distribution deal, and steel prices collapsed, and you know, as a result of that, you know, there was no earnings, and we had to put more money in it, and finally rescued the new money, lost the old money. I had, you know, one of my investors literally, you know, had me come to their office and was screaming at me, and I grew up in a family where nobody ever raised their voice. And the idea that somebody was screaming at me, you know, I was the dumbest, and unfortunately I had to agree with them. There was no defense. And I was sitting in this wooden chair in front of this guy's desk, and I felt my face getting redder and redder. Hotter, not redder, hotter. And I said, why is my face getting hot? And it's because I was going to start crying. And I said, I can't start crying. I just can't do that. It was such a shameful, awful moment. And I remember walking out of that office, and it was an autumn day, and it was by the Hudson River. The leaves were coming down. The sun was bouncing off of the river. It was cool, windy, and I said, I'm never going to have another meeting like this in my life.
And you didn't?
And I didn't. And I said, okay, I got to learn this investment thing. I'm not a genius, apparently. And okay, we're going to have a group decision-making process. We're going to have everything in writing. We're going to have to accept nothing anybody writes. You know, we're going to have a group, in effect, analytic session where everybody at the table has to speak. No free riders. And what you have to do is criticize the deal. Where are the weaknesses? What assumptions are being used? Why are they the right assumptions? What are the range of things that can happen as we play with these assumptions, and we're never going to lose money again. And everybody at this new firm is going to get used to this kind of analytic rigor, analytic attack, whatever you call it. And so the key to having a successful financial institution, among others, is to depersonalize decision-making. Biggest problem you have is when people work on deals, they fall in love, and if you say it's not a good deal, they don't like you. And they make it really clear that they're unhappy with you. And if you turn them down a second time, they get even more unhappy. And if you do it a third time, they're going to be at risk of leaving. Because everyone in finance is very proud because it's an intangible business and nobody actually knows the right answer. So the, you know, the ego that people use is dispositive. And I wanted to create a system where all of that acting out and, you know, the bad deals that mostly get done by financial institutions, people know in advance it's going to be mediocre. They just approve it because they don't want to deal with that person. And that's the truth of it. And the deals that are wonderful, they're the easiest to approve. And they just sort of almost talk to themselves. And you could do really well. So what I learned by doing that was how to perfect that kind of system. What I learned with some arbitrage guy who we told not to do something. It was a United Airlines a takeover deal, monster-sized deal at the time, and you needed all the major banks in the world to finance it. And one of our partners, for reasons unknown, subscribed to Japanese newspapers. And he read that the Japanese newspapers were going to finance the deal, which meant there wasn't enough capital in the world to do it, which meant the deal that was announced was going to collapse. And we told this guy, don't play that deal. And he set up a deal with us where he had independence. And he said, well, I disagree with you. I said, how could you disagree? There's nothing to disagree about. The Japanese aren't going to do it. There's always stuff on deals, and they come together, and this and that. So he took a really big position. And of course, the Japanese didn't show up. We lost a fortune on the thing. And he was, calling me. I was in a hotel, the west coast of Florida. And I remember calling in to see how we were doing. He said, Steve, it's a great day today. We only lost $2 million because it would have been $5 million, but I traded us out of this position. And I'm listening to this guy and I'm thinking, this is a great day? I lost $2 million? And I said, I'll forget his name. I won't use his name.
Yeah, I remember.
But I said, this is not a great day. We've had a whole series of losses, and now we're losing more. I said, look, I don't have any power other than the power to fire you, because that's the only way you would come to work, and I accommodated your needs, which I'll never do again. I'm going to have to fire you. And he said, I don't blame you. I've been terrible. I haven't listened to you, and you should fire me. And I'm going, what kind of nutty situation is this? Okay? Obviously I picked the wrong person. So I'm very cautious on liquid securities. We have a variety of controls. In the small part of our business, we've got $100 billion basically in hedge fund area. But I learned be really careful who you pick and make sure you have the ability to control. Because I may not, be an arbitrage trader, but if you're in the M&A business, you know what's going to happen as well as they do. It was not an area that we emphasized, but I also learned lessons. The key to being successful long-term is every situation is a learning experience. And you have to share those learnings with everyone around you, and you have to analyze failures. In finance, nobody actually ever wrote the memo where you made a bad investment. I think that it was all whited out afterwards.
Exactly.
Nobody owns that deal. Nobody was responsible.
The room's empty.
Yeah, and I look at those situations much differently. And I look at them and say, okay, we failed. The question is, why did this go wrong, if it goes wrong? And how do we never have it happen again? And everybody's got to face that. Now, you will find that that's an alien experience in finance. People just, they sort of like going to the cracks someplace.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about something that doesn't work. I like talking about things that don't work, because that's how you learn. That's how you change an organization.
And those are the learning lessons. But Steve, we're going to come to culture in a moment here. One of the other hallmarks of what you've done, we talked about the LBO business, now called something else, private equity. You basically pivoted the firm a number of different times. You were the first people really in real estate, which is now massive. You were the first people in credit with, when you started out with GSO. And now you've got $300 billion of AUM that's coming out of the retail system, which is obviously very significant. I'm going to switch around. What has been the secret from your standpoint with these different businesses of keeping what I think you were just talking about, really, which is the culture? How did you keep the culture alive, and what has it meant for your leadership here over time? Because I think one of the biggest hallmarks that Steve Schwarzman has had is the culture of the firm. How has this evolved with all these different businesses coming into the firm?
Well, it's actually pretty simple, to tell you the truth. You have to have a set of principles that that you can easily share with everybody, that they can understand, and those become the rules of the road. It's easy if you articulate that you want to be the best in the world at whatever you choose to do. So that way we can measure ourselves really easily. Mm-hmm. You don't need to hire anybody.
Yep.
You want to have excellence in everything. You want to work hard. You want to have a business built on complete meritocracy. No glass ceilings. A business that keeps expanding so everyone can have a place to grow. I believe in no internal politics, of firing offense. I watched what happened at Lehman,
right,
and that wasn't going to happen. I believed in the highest level of integrity in everything we do. I believe in never losing money, and only hiring nice people. In finance, you get a real range of characters. And there's always that one really smart, dysfunctional person whose office you don't walk by, you walk around. And I don't want that person. I don't want anyone at the firm to be scared of anyone. That we should be, working collaboratively. I tell people, if anybody contacts you during a day, internally, asking you something, that you have to get back to them that day, because they're calling you for a reason. They want to know something you know, and you're going to do the same thing in reverse someday, and you want that done. I have a bunch of these things that I could rattle off. And we tell people, I'm still addressing all the new employees. And we tell them when we're interviewing, they should know this. I also believe in interviews, you need to see people more than one day, because sometimes they look different, right. Behave differently. And we believe in having like 15 people, 17 people interview somebody.
That's critical.
Because you need that consensus on that other person, because you want them, to fit into your culture. And if not, you don't have a culture. So what I tell people is, I lay all this stuff out. We're a very high performance culture. We only hire now. Wasn't that way at the beginning. You hire anybody you could, but now we hire, 0.28 of 1% of the people who try and work at the firm. I mean, Harvard's like 3%, and we're hiring people like from Harvard. When you get to our level now, and what's important is people have to understand, and I tell them, you can have your own views on politics, books, music, almost anything in life. But our basic principles are not open for discussion. It's what it is.
Yep.
If you don't like it, you shouldn't work here because it won't work. And consequently, like everybody at the firm believes that. When you have that, it's so powerful, incredibly powerful.
And it's produced, I mean, I want to come on to philanthropy, which is important, but just as people should recognize, who would have thought Blackstone and BlackRock, probably two of the most important financial institutions in the world, sort of came out of this vision. And I think it's something for everyone to kind of reflect on. And I think the hallmark has been, Steve, your cultural leadership from that standpoint. That has had a massive impact over 40 years. And congratulations on that anniversary. I want to go to your philanthropy, because you become a major donor to educational institutions, cultural institutions. Give us a little bit of a quick view on the Schwarzman Scholars program. What has motivated you? What are you trying to achieve there, Steve?
When I do things typically philanthropically, I'm actually not trying to give away money. I wish somebody else would put up the money. But I try and, I'm going to use the word attack problems where I think I can do something unique. And just to give money to things I don't find exciting. Although that's what people think philanthropy is. Right. So I was looking at U.S.-Chinese relations back in 2010. An interesting story with the Chinese. When we went public in 2007, right. Done with your help, that the Chinese government showed up before the deal and asked to buy 9.9% of the offering, and we worked that out, gave them non-voting stock, no seat on the board, because I didn't know them. It's not that I didn't like them, I just, I'd only been to China once in my life in 1990. So we did the deal, $31 a share, if you'll remember.
I do.
And it was the second largest IPO of the decade.
Yep.
The largest one was done by an aspiring company called Google. It worked out for them, for sure. And, I was put on a lot of visible Chinese things, and I met a lot of people in China. And then there was a 100th anniversary of the university where I had an affiliation there. And the president came and asked me to give him a lot of money for the 100th anniversary. His timing was perfect. It was, I think it was 6 months after the global financial crisis. Our stock had gone from $31 to $3.55. And this guy's asking me for a lot of money. I mean, I used to think I had a lot of money. It all went away. So I told him to go away, which he did. Then they changed presidents at some point, and the new president decided he wanted me to give money. Well, it was a few years later, and things had started to improve. And I tried to avoid him, and I did a really good job. And finally, he called and he said, "Well, I'm coming to see you." At that point in China, nobody traveled. You needed government approvals to do that. So the fact that this guy was coming to see me meant, he had gone up the chain above the university level. So I said, "Oh my goodness, I might have to do something. I wonder what I would do if I had to do something." So I sort of said, what would be really interesting that could impact the world? And I said, well, why don't we start something like the Rhodes Scholarship program? Call it the Schwarzman Scholars, because that's what it was. and bring people from all over the world to China to see what it's like. Do it for a year, and let them visit different places in the country. Get them a mentor from their society. Have them work a little bit part-time, either in a charitable organization or a corporation. Get the best kids in the world. Build a building where they all live together, so they meld. Let's have it be 40% U.S., 20% China, 40% rest of world, and that's what we did. And it's turned out to be absolutely phenomenal. I ran into President Obama, who I knew, right before the opening, and he said something like, "Steve, what are you up to these days?" And I said, "Well, I've got this thing I'm thinking of starting in China." He said, "Well, how can I help you?" I said, "Well, how about a video for the opening or a letter?" He said, "Okay, talk to Valerie Jarrett, who was his chief of staff." And he said, "I'll do that." So we showed up in China with a letter from the president, and I knew the way China worked. If I had an American president letter, the China president was going to be hard-pressed to not respond. And there was just a new president elected or appointed, or whatever they do in China, named Xi Jinping, who I'd met 7 years earlier in Shanghai. And so we got a letter from him. So basically, we got the presidents of both countries to endorse this academic program, which is pretty amazing. And we announced this thing, and we had to hire faculty, do all kinds of stuff, but we've managed to get the most amazing human beings I've met, to come to this program. And we have all these, famous speakers from around the world and famous professors. We've got our 10th reunion in April. We have 90% of the students going back to Beijing. Just think about your own experiences going to university, going to reunion. You get 90% back. So the bond that we've done here is important. And the Chinese government loves the program. They really love it.
I think it's very significant. Steve, there's so many more questions, and I want to leave a bit of time for the audience here right now. Just as a last thing, one of the ways I look at you also too is people come to you for advice. It's just one of those things. They want to come to your office and hear your views. I've certainly done it, and many more important people than me do. You've advised governments. How do you look at your role when you're advising leaders from the standpoint of how you approach it? Because you're a voice that people turn to.
I always try and look at every situation and figure out what both sides are thinking. And if somebody says, "What do you think I should do?" It's about what, who's involved, what's the right course to accomplish your objectives. It's not a lot different than the sort of advisory role you would take here at Citi, but it's with countries, and the people who run countries, unlike the people who do M&A work, aren't always expert in all the things they're supposed to be doing. In fact, there's such a range of things. If you're running a country, you can't master all that. And so you're dealing with people who have apparent authority, but don't always have complete comfort in an area. And so if you ask a question within your own comfort zone, it's surprisingly easy to help these people. And you can explain why you think a certain thing works, or in some cases you can say, look, there are 2 or 3 options of what you can do here. So here's what I think about each of those. What do you think? And then, they might say, well, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, you can use option 2 or 3. They both work. Or, there's a clear winner here as to where you should be going. And it's just like an open conversation where, in a way, to be really good in the advice business, you have to assume you're the client, not yourself.
That's a point people should remember. Look at it from their vantage point, yes. and have the one item that you have, people, Steve, and that is people trust you. They trust the advice.
Well, I'm pretty trustworthy because I don't know any other way to act.
Correct.
Because I have a lot of things I do. I'm a great believer, as you could probably tell by listening to me for a bit. I'm quite open, and I'm reasonably direct without being offensive. And if people can sense that that's what you do, and it's not about me, it's about them and their problems.
And you have one thing, and then I really want to turn to the audience, which I often tell people here, you're very authentic.
Yeah, I've basically not changed.
You're the same.
Yeah, I'm the same from, when I was
from when we first
like
met,
a kid.
And before that as a kid. So listen, I think we're privileged to have Steve here. As you can tell, I could go on for hours, and I've been privileged to spend time with Steve over the years. What I'd like to do, if I could, and I can't really see that well, is any questions from the audience, because we have many here on Slido. If you could just give that person a microphone right there, please. Go ahead.
Is that on? Oh, it already is? Okay,
there you
great.
go.
Hi there, Mr. Schwarzman. My name is Michael Suzuki. I'm an industrials analyst here at Citi. My question for you is regarding talent. You've made good and bad talent throughout your career. What are the traits that you look for in a good hire, and how has that changed over the years?
Like, what am I looking for when I'm hiring somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty simple. I'm looking for somebody, who's alert, smart, thoughtful. I'm looking for somebody who can hold the table. I'm looking for somebody who's got some sense of humor, somebody who's interesting to talk to, somebody who's self-confident enough to say, I don't know the answer to that, right? And somebody who's curious, because to be in our business, you have to be endlessly curious. Those kind of people come in different packages. I always look in people's eyes, because the eyes are the window to the soul. And they tell you who that person is. And they tell you what they're like. And you can see how they respond when you say something. When I interview people, I have absolutely no idea of what's going to happen in that room. No idea what I'm going to say, what they're going to say. I just walk in and I look at them, and it makes me do something. And I almost always get one of these CV things, and you read their resume, and usually at the bottom, there's something interesting about hobbies, like I'm a beekeeper, but I don't wear protection. Something like that. So what happens when somebody writes something like that on a resume, they just write that, so you'll ask them about it. So I have a major decision to make. Do I ask them about beekeeping, or do I just forget that? And it depends what they look like. It depends if there's anything else better to talk about, because they already have planned out what they're going to say when I ask about the beekeeper thing. So this is a little boring. Sometimes I do it. I fall for that bait. So sometimes I don't do it, or I'll come back at the end and say, "What's with the beekeeper thing?" I don't let them get away with it at the beginning to control the
And that's
interview.
why it's important to have 15 people see them, just in case you got it wrong.
So I look at every interview as an amazing adventure. I get to meet another person. They obviously are going to try to be charming or something. I mean, they're sitting there. So this should be fun. And that's how I look at it.
Okay. Right over there for that person. And then there's a person over here. And then there's plenty on Slido, but we'll...
The other thing before you talk, you should be relaxed when you're in this situation. Don't be tense. It's just another person.
Exactly.
Great. Good morning, Stephen, and thank you very much for sharing your story. So as an investor, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions.
No, you only get one.
Okay, well, it's a compound question then. Okay. So what's the most important investment theme in your mind, looking forward out 5 and 10 years, one that you are going to pursue? And then over that same time period, what's the greatest risk that worries you in regard to being an investor and the markets? Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of investment themes, right now you have sort of like a double theme. It's the same thing, really, the way we look at it. It's sort of the growth of AI and the need for power. We've become, at Blackstone, the largest developer of data centers in the world, the largest owner of data centers in the world, and the most active developer, certainly in the alternative space, for power. These are sort of enduring types of investment theses, just because of what's happening in the world. And it'll move to Europe eventually. They're the slowest. Right. It'll be in Asia, and here you can see the immense amounts of money going into these areas. And we have, for the most part, just decided to be in the pick and shovel business to avoid the risk of all the different things that you can try and do with AI, some of which will work, some of them won't. We're going to be doing some interesting things beyond just the data center business, but that will continue to boom for quite some time. It's a very low risk, high return business, which actually requires a skill, as some of the hyperscalers are finding out who didn't use us. One of the heads of these giant companies said to me, "Oh my gosh, what an adventure."
Yeah, they're in a different business.
Right. People who tell me they know what they're doing, like you did, sometimes they don't know.
What's the biggest risk on the second part of the question? What do you worry about in terms of a risk?
Well, in terms of risk now, the risk, besides government policy, which is always an immense risk, as governments change what they believe and you get caught, is really, what will happen with businesses generally in terms of the impact of AI. And when GPT started, I did a Zoom with all the heads of our companies that we own. And I said, listen, because I've been involved with AI for 10 years, I said, we're going into a new world where There's going to be very powerful technologies that are going to end up really changing the world that we live in. And they're going to be big winners and losers. And the people who make pretend this is not happening are going to be the losers. And the people who jump on it and figure out how to adapt to this technology, adopt this technology, they're going to be the winners. And we are all going to be winners. And the reason we're going to be winners is you're going to make us winners. And I said, some of you really aren't as computer friendly as you might be. And your instinct is going to make pretend you're an ostrich. And you're going to put your head in the sand. And you're going to have a nice meeting with me. And you're going to think I'm joking. I understand this, okay? And you don't have that right. You are going to be in this game. We are all going to be in this game. And we are going to be the winners, because what happens when you're not is the cost advantages go to somebody else. They can take that money and have a cheaper product. They can use the technology to increase revenues, and if they'll take your customers. They'll be more efficient. Okay? You're under threat, but you also have a big upside. So this is what I knew all this stuff was coming.
Well, you've also been, between MIT and Oxford, you've done a lot from an AI standpoint.
I gave MIT their College of Computing. And if you can remember the early part of this interview with Leon, I'm a social science person. I don't know anything about, sort of computers, except it's the Schwarzman College of Computing at MIT. So I know enough to know where to be, okay? And I did that in 2018, and chat wasn't happening until roughly, I guess, 2022. So the risk of not being attuned to what's going to be evolving, I think, is a risk I worry about. And of course, there are all kinds of geopolitical stuff that as part of investment you must focus on as to where real risk is, because that kind of risk, if you get it wrong, I mean, we have an Asian fund, which is the best performing Asia fund, I think, in the world. And our returns are in the 30s. We put our money mostly in India. So that kind of geopolitical assessment, creates huge, variation in outcomes of performance.
And those are big judgment calls. I mean,
What's it?
Those are big judgment calls.
Yes.
I see there was one, I can't really see that well, right over there, that lady. And we'll do one last question here because Steve's been so generous with his time.
Yes, thank you both so much. Hi, my name is Shayla Cherry. I'm an assistant vice president in technology governance and also a member of the Schwarzman Scholars class of 2023. So glad to have you in the building. So Schwarzman Scholars taught me and showed me the value of global leadership and relationship building when it comes to my career. But I wanted to know what else you think is important for the next generation of leadership as we move into positions of influence in the world.
What do you think is important for them in terms of being leaders? The next generation, right? Yeah. The next generation of leadership.
Well, first I should say, she's wearing this beautiful sort of purple scarf, which my wife designed. Okay. And I also have a nice purple tie. So whenever I go around the world, there's either somebody wearing a scarf or, a tie. I think for the next generation, I I don't look at leadership from a generational perspective. I look at it from the perspective of your ability, to project authenticity that attracts other people to do things that you believe are worthy. And it's how you conduct yourself, how you attract other people, how you define the mission of what you're trying to do, and bring other people into that, buy in, and tactically it involves checking in with people who are doing something when they don't expect it. It's actually caring about the people that work allegedly for you because you're all working together.
Right.
They're really not working for you. You're like a team. And it's developing, sort of a caring element about them, and constantly defining excellence, so that people know what they should be doing. And if you can do that, you'll have a huge following, and you'll be more and more successful, as will the people who work with you. And I think those are like enduring traits. And if people know that as a leader, that you'll support them, and particularly when they have a problem. Sometimes people make mistakes. Jumping on them, which is sort of a natural human thing, is like the wrong thing. If you're working with smart people, they know if they made a mistake, it's a horrible thing for them. You have to learn how to support them, get them through, that situation, so that they keep their confidence, but they also learn what they should be doing.
And that, frankly, that epitomizes Steve. I mean, leadership by example. Steve, I want to thank you on behalf of the folks here, the folks online, the folks that will be watching this in the days and months ahead. It was inspirational. It's quite a journey here right now. And, from a personal standpoint, I'm privileged to have known you for a very long time. So please give a hand to Steve. And for those of you, please join me for my next session in a few weeks with Michael Dell. We look forward to seeing everyone here. Thank you, Steve. What a pleasure.